I've been meaning to do a more polished video of all the materials that I'm asking for this class, but just haven't gotten around to it. So this is going to be a little bit less polished than I would like, but hopefully it'll give you the information you need for making some buying decisions when you go to the art store. In recent sessions of this class, I've noticed a lot more people showing up with Utrecht acrylic paints. So I wanted to make this video specifically to talk about acrylic paint. If you are using oil paints, then you don't necessarily need to watch this video. But acrylic paint, it's actually a little bit more of a diverse medium than you might anticipate. So a lot of people, when they go to the art store, they're taken by whatever art store attendant to the aisle with all the acrylic paints. And they're shown walls with all the different kinds of acrylic paint. And the acrylic paint looks something like this in tubes. And at Blick specifically, they might show you the wall of Utrecht acrylic tube paints. And there's nothing wrong with any of these paints, but I think unless you know what you're looking at or looking for, you might not realize that there are a lot of other options and that there are strengths and weaknesses to each one of those options. So I wanted to explain that a little bit. With those tube paints that are up on the wall, those are what are called heavy body acrylics. And the tube paints are meant to mimic the material quality of oil paints. So they're very thick and they add different materials to the paint to make it thicker. And that's great if you want a lot of texture, but if you don't want a lot of texture, and especially when you're starting a painting, often you don't want a lot of texture because you don't want to commit to a bunch of texture before you know what your composition is. It might not be in your best interest to go with a high texture paint. Also, when you add those extra materials to acrylic paint to give it the texture, those materials often also make the paint dry faster. So my recommendation has increasingly been to not get Utrecht specifically because that paint is especially thick. So you get a ton of texture and it dries really, really fast. And a lot of people struggle with that particular quality of acrylic paint is the fast drying time. The fast drying time. So I would recommend do not get Utrecht acrylic paint. I love Utrecht acrylic paint and it's good paint for the price. It's got good pigment density. The colors are nice. It's just too thick and it dries too fast. So you might ask, what are the other options, or what are the better options? And here I'm gonna switch over to my overhead camera here to try to give you a better idea of what some of those options are. Let me see if I can center that. So here is my tubed acrylic. This is cobalt blue. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this out as just a point of reference so you can see how thick that is. That is heavy body acrylic. You can see that when I squeeze it out, it retains its shape. It doesn't really spread out at all. And it's quite thick. You can see that it's just kind of that bubble of paint. This is golden. Golden is not quite as thick as Utrecht. It doesn't dry as fast, but still is a heavy body, or this particular line of golden paints are their heavy body acrylics. So that's what a heavy body acrylic is going to look like when you put it out on your palette. In comparison, this paint comes from a company called Nova Color, and their paints actually don't come in a bottle like that. I put them in a bottle like that. Nova Color paints come usually in containers like this, and they have different sizes. This is the smallest size that they come in. I put those paints into bottles like this because it makes it much easier to work quickly and get paint out when I need it. And also especially when I'm teaching, doing demos and stuff like that. So I like it. And it's not too hard to get it into these bottles. Okay, so this is my heavy body acrylic that I've got there. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this Nova Color acrylic. And you can see as I put it out there on the palette that it starts to spread a little bit. And if I tilt the palette, it's going to start moving. And maybe you can't see that on camera, but I can. It's going to start spreading out. It tends to have more kind of uh, gradual curves in its texture. It kind of smooths and levels out a little bit as you paint with it. So it's actually quite a bit thinner and looser than this heavy body acrylic is, which you can see is more like grease, or like a thick gel. So this is Nova Color, which is naturally just basically with Nova Color. I've spoken with them at their store, the guy that makes it, and basically, from what I understand, they just don't put anything but the bare essentials of acrylic in there. So they don't have any fillers, they don't have any drying agents. It's just the basics of acrylic. So you just, you're getting the most pure, you're getting the most reduced and minimal acrylic paint possible, which as a result is more soupy, more thinner, more liquid than the heavy body acrylic. What that means is that it moves better, or more, because it's more fluid, it moves better. As you push it around with a brush, it just moves and spreads and covers a larger area more easily. It gets into the crevices of the canvas texture more easily, so coverage is a little bit more solid typically. Um, but not only that, because it doesn't have all those extra fillers and drying agents, it dries a lot slower. So, especially when you're painting skin tones and you want really gradual transitions between colors and smooth gradients, you want the paint to dry slower so you have time to mix wet into wet, right? So Nova Color is probably my number one recommendation for the kind of paint that is good to start with if you've never painted with acrylic before. It's got a good, it's thin, but it's not too thin. And I'll show you some other paints that are thinner. Um, and so it's got a little bit of heft, a little bit of thickness, and there's a nice kind of consistency to it. It's pleasant to paint with. Um, but it's so it's not too thin, but it's also not too thick, so you don't get a unwanted texture, and it doesn't dry as fast. So Nova Color, if you can, that's where I would go. I'd get like my basic five colors: red, yellow, blue, maybe burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and then titanium white and black. Maybe look at my look at my list of colors on the material sheet for more information about color palette and which colors to choose. I have more information there. But basically, just buy some basic colors, a color palette to start with the Nova Color. They don't sell at retailers like Blick. You have to buy it on their website, which is kind of unfortunate. You can go to their store. It used to be in Culver City, is now in Hawthorne, so not very easy to get to. So that's Nova Color Artist Acrylics, and that is their website, novacolorartistacrylics.com, I believe, or you can Google it. So that is Nova Color. What I want to show you next are some other options. There's such a breadth of different materials within the umbrella of acrylic paint. And that's what I think a lot of people don't appreciate. And there really is quite a bit of difference between them, and their strengths and weaknesses are significant. So just unfortunately, that information isn't always readily available, and you probably won't get it from the people at the store. Okay, so next what I want to show you is, let me go to my palette again. This tube, or bottle, I guess, is also a golden product, but it is called High Flow. And actually, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to go get. So before I get to High Flow, I'm going to get to this one. So this is also a golden product, but it is called, you can see up here at the top, Fluid Acrylic. Fluid Acrylic. So this is actually similar in consistency, and I'll try to pour a little bit of it out here so you can see. So you see how I pour that just like the Nova Color, it kind of spreads out as it hits the palette and is much more fluid. It's actually more fluid than the Nova color is, and it's going to drip around on the palette much faster than the Nova color. So a lot more fluid than the Nova color, but similar. So if you can't get the Nova color, the golden fluid acrylics are another way to go that you might consider trying. If you want something thinner and that moves a little bit more easily. The next thing that I was about to show you was golden high flow acrylics. So high flow is extremely loose. It's extremely fluid. And I'm going to try to put a little bit out here so you can see it. You can see it's very watery. You can actually use it with fountain pens and really fine brushes, calligraphy, for airbrushing, so that really watery consistency comes in handy for things like that. I use it a lot in airbrush. There are also, Golden has a line of airbrush paints, but from what I understand, the airbrush paint and the high flow are pretty much the same paint. It's just marketed differently. So again, mostly the difference between these is in consistency, and then really between the heavy body and these others, the heavy body is going to dry significantly faster, which makes wet into wet blending more difficult. And a lot of people who start with acrylic really struggle with that aspect of the fast drying time. So it is something worth considering. Okay, so those those are the main ones that I tend to want to cover, especially first day of class. Heavy body paints that come in the tubes, and that's what they're mostly going to want to sell you. Looks like I got a thumbs up on the screen. So heavy body paints in the tubes that the attendant at the store is probably going to want to sell you if you just go in and say, I want to buy some acrylic paints. If you do want to buy the heavy body in the tube, that's fine. It's good paint. I don't want to dissuade you from that necessarily. It's not like I'm saying that it's not good to buy. I would, though, definitively recommend that you not get Utrecht acrylics. Again, I love the paint. I've used it for years. I love it, quality paint. But I've just noticed, especially in recent sessions, that if you're new to acrylic, that Utrecht paint is just so thick that it's hard to work with. You really fight it a lot. So no Utrecht. If you want to get the heavy body, get Golden brand. There's a bunch of other brands that are good. Sennelier is a good acrylic paint. I believe they have acrylic paint. I'm getting not trusting my memory at the moment, but I believe Sennelier is a good brand, and their paint tends to be more fluid, probably closer to the Nova Color paint. And then Grumbacher and Winsor Newton. There's a bunch of different brands, but Golden's a pretty solid way to go, and they've got a good color library, and whatever, and good mediums and stuff like that. So that's probably what I would recommend if you want to go with what's at Blick and what's in a tube. If you want a thinner option, Golden Fluid's a good way to go. If you're coming from watercolor and you want things to move around really fluidly, then the fluid high flow acrylic's a good option. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is medium. So especially those of you that are used to working with watercolor or with ink. With watercolor, if you want it to be looser and more fluid, you just add more water. It's important to understand that acrylic is not like watercolor in that way. And the reason is the medium that they use with acrylic is PVA, polyvinyl acetate. It's a chemical, and that chemical has to be I'm forgetting the word that I'm thinking of, but it has to be concentrated. It has to be concentrated enough so that the chemical bond forms a specific structure that creates a solid bond that basically acts as a glue that keeps your color on the paper. So if you dilute that too much, then it no longer is able to create the structure that functions as a glue. When I was talking to, and this has been reinforced on multiple sources online that are highly trustable, But when I was talking to the guy at Nova Color, and this is in their literature as well, I believe he said you should not have any more than 8 to 10% water in your mixture. So what this means is when you're painting with acrylic paint and you take your brush that's dirty with acrylic paint, put it in your water to wash it off, and then go back to your palette, all that water that's in the brush that then mixes with the acrylic paint is going to be way more than 8 to 10% of that mixture. In fact, it's probably going to be north of 50%, which is not good, right? So that's bad. So when I'm painting with acrylic and I clean off my brushes to then be able to go to grab a new color, I always squeeze the excess water in my brush off on a dry paper towel that I have in my other hand, right? So then you might ask, well, what if I want to make my paint more transparent, or I want it to be more thin and watery? The answer to that is medium. So you clean your brush with water, and that's it. You do not use water as a thinner or as a medium. Water should be only for cleaning. Otherwise, you want to get water as far away as possible because it's going to affect the stability of that paint layer, right? So if you want to make your paint more transparent for glazes or for whatever technique you're using for gluing things down, or if you want your paint to be more fluid, more watery, what you want to do is add a more fluid or watery medium. So I'm going to go back to my overview here and show you, let's see, in this bottle I have, hopefully you can kind of see it. In this bottle I have you can see down at the bottom as I shake it how it looks like it's almost water. It's more kind of the consistency of milk. But you can see it's very, very fluid. This is a medium that comes from Nova Color, and I'm going to squirt a little bit out here so you can see what that looks like. See, look at that as I drip it on the palette. You can see how it's mixing with those other acrylic paints. And it's very, very fluid, very watery. In fact, you can find other mediums that are even more watery than that. So say you want to be able to kind of just move your canvas around so that the paint mixes in a more kind of watercolor fluid way. You would add that more fluid medium. I think that's called Novaplex 235 or something like that. There's two different levels of fluidity in the Novaplex, or those liquid mediums. I know that Golden also sells fluid and high flow mediums, so you can get those thinner consistencies. Gamblin has a product called PVA size, which is a replacement for traditional hide skin glues that they would use in different painting techniques. So PVA size is another, and that's almost water. PVA size is very, 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 very thin. So if you want to get as close to water as possible and still have, a really archival and safe acrylic medium, I would go with the PVA size. So those, I think that is like the fundamental and what I tend to cover first day of class. I've just noticed that people have been coming in with all these brand new Utrecht paints, and they end up just trying them because they have them, and then they just fight the paint and they don't enjoy themselves. So I thought I'd make a little video, and hopefully this is helpful and it gives you some ideas as you're going to the art store to prepare for class. If you have any questions specifically about materials, feel free to shoot me an email through the Brentwood Art Center system or email system, or contact the office and they can get a message to me too. Anyway, I'm looking forward to working with you, and let me know if you have any other questions. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Bye.